Welcome to the next video for the book of Revelation. We just finished chapter 6, so obviously we are in chapter 7. But remember that chapters 6 and 7 are one coherent unit. That's why the single sermon was on those chapters, and that's why this video is a continuation of this set of lessons. And so really we're in part 2 of chapters 6 and 7. And so remembering what happened in Revelation chapter 6 is that the sixth seal has been opened, which means that Judgment Day is here. And you may think, well, we're only in chapter 6. Why are we in Judgment Day? Well, hopefully you watched the previous video. Things like the sky is being rolled back, and the moon has melted away into blood, and stars are falling out of the sky. Judgment Day has arrived. That's what seal number 6 is describing. And the people who are there are asking in the middle of it. If you look back at the end of chapter 6, the last phrase of that chapter is, who can stand? People who are being judged are just saying, who can stand? And in the midst of these seals being broken open, there's a different kind of seal that we're about to learn about. Because instead of getting to seal number 7, which is actually going to be a whole nother section of Revelation, instead of getting to seal number 7, we are going to get the answer to the question of who can stand. Now, the people being judged asked that question rhetorically, saying, no one can stand, is what they meant. But then we're going to learn about a group, 144,000 of them, who can. And so I will start reading. Revelation chapter 7, verse 1 through 8. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. 12,000 from the tribe of Judah were sealed, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, 12,000 from the tribe of Asher, 12,000 from the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 from the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 from the tribe of Levi, 12,000 from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 from the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin were sealed. We'll stop there for just a moment. Usually, discussions on these verses jump right into talking about the 12,000, but when I read over these verses, where my brain goes, because as you'll see in a minute, I think the 144,000 thing is actually pretty easy. But my brain goes to the beginning of it of, why on earth are we talking about angels holding back the winds from the 4 corners? Like, why do we need to be concerned about whether or not the ocean has wind on it? Because that's one of the things they're stopping. And that's when you have to go, okay, let's actually look at what the Bible says about wind and things like that, and whether or not wind has to do with judgment. And well, in Revelation chapter 6, there were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and you get those 4 types of plagues. You'll find, if you look up wind throughout the rest of the Bible, that wind is actually listed as another type of plague. And you might think, well, that's silly, until you start to remember, oh yeah, wind includes things like tornadoes and hurricanes. So it's not that silly, is it? And so as you see, wind is commonly grouped in with the 4 types of the plagues of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So I've got Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 12. I have in the notes for you, and that verse says, a third part of you shall die of pestilence. That's one of the horsemen. And be consumed with famine in your midst. That's one of the horsemen. A third part shall fall by the sword. That's one of the horsemen. And a third part I will scatter to all the winds, and will ensheathe the sword after them. So being scattered to the winds, in other passages, that's one example in Ezekiel chapter 5, in other passages of the Bible, are grouped in with the plagues here. The fact that wind wasn't brought up in chapter 6 shouldn't matter to someone who's extremely familiar with other apocalyptic type passages throughout the Bible. And so if you're a really good student of the Old Testament, you're going to realize that when he's saying hold back the wind, he's saying hold back the plagues. Now, that should also get those gears rolling in your head. The little hamster should start being encouraged to start running on that wheel in the head, because it's saying that this is one way to speak about God's judgment, but it's not the way we just spoke of God's judgment, which means the way we just spoke about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is not supposed to be limited to just those 4 things only. Remember, as I've tried to reiterate in the last video, it's a collective of lots of suffering and judgment and just life on a fallen earth. And so in chapter 7, we see more reason not to read it ABC equals ABC type of literally. I'm not saying don't read the Bible literally. I'm saying that A does not always have to equal just A, especially when we're in passages like the book of Revelation. It's almost like apocalyptic literature is more concerned with the forest than with the trees in particular. And so it's not a specific roadmap to the end of the world. It's about life on a fallen planet in general. Maybe as things are escalating, but it doesn't have to be the roadmap kind of situation here. Now, God commands in this chapter 7 with the wind being held back, and so in the back of our minds should be all of the things of the 6 seals. And so this is something that's ongoing while those 6 seals are being opened up. And so in the back of our minds, we're thinking about that, and God commands that judgment cannot be released on everyone on earth until we save at least some people from the earth here. His people need to be saved. And we see in Revelation chapter 7 that there are people who need to be sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Now, this is very similar, if you're familiar with your Old Testament, to another passage in Ezekiel. Remember, the book of Revelation is constantly, more than once per verse, somehow alluding to the Old Testament. And so Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4 to 6 is the passage that talks about this. This has already happened once before. In Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4, it says, "And the Lord said to him, Pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it. And to the others he said in my hearing, Pass through the city after him and strike. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women, but touch no one on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the elders who were before the house. And so we see in Ezekiel that people were marked on their foreheads to show whether or not they were loyal to God or loyal to the things opposed to God. And God says if they're loyal to God, make sure they are spared. Now the thing is, Ezekiel chapter 9 is not the book of Revelation. There are things in Ezekiel that don't seem to be fulfilled, but there are things in Ezekiel, most of Ezekiel, that is definitely fulfilled. Ezekiel chapter 9 is talking about when the Babylonians came in and took over Israel and then sent some people off to Babylon. That's where you get stories like Daniel and the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so that's what those stories are. So Ezekiel chapter 9 is fulfilled already. But we see nothing in history about the Babylonians showing up and looking at people's foreheads and going, let me look up on your forehead there. No, can't kill you. That's not how it works. So it's not literally being marked with something literal on your forehead. It's symbolic of saying, to whom do you belong? And God is saying, I will supernaturally protect those who belong to me. And that's what's happening in our book in Revelation as well. God's saying there's this judgment happening on the earth, but I'm going to make sure that the people who are loyal to me are okay. And then we get a list of 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, going back to the mark thing, I just want to give you a spoiler alert for later on in the book. Chapters 13 through 20, it's going to matter what kind of mark you have, because we're going to start talking about a different mark later on in the book, the mark of the beast, right? The Antichrist type of mark. And so just a heads up, that probably won't be a physical marking or a thing that's literally inserted inside of your skin, right? It's not going to be like an injection. It's not going to be like a credit card number. It probably has to do with to whom you are loyal, just like the mark of God is. Because as we'll learn later on, the mark of the beast is just a sad knockoff of the mark of God. And so file that away in your head. That's not just an Ezekiel thing, too. That comes up in the intertestamental time period. If you look up the pseudepigraphical book, that's just a fun word to say, the pseudepigraphical book of the Psalm of Solomon, not Song of Solomon, the Psalm of Solomon, chapter 15 talks about how God's people are going to be marked as well, and also people against God will be marked as well. And so that's interesting book to look at. But again, it's not the Bible. It's just sort of bonus material between the two testaments there. Now, there's the 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from that tribe, 12,000 from that tribe, 12,000 from that tribe. And that is comparable to like the Old Testament census data, right? If you've ever gone through a read through the Bible in a year program, you get to You get to the book of Exodus, and it's great. This is story time is good. And then you get to the law, and then the few and the proud make it through the law, right? You keep reading through all the instructions about how to build the tabernacle and things like that, and then you get to the census data. Whew. And so if you can make it through that, good job. That is awesome. And keep doing it. And so this count is very similar to that kind of a passage. It's census data. But here's the thing, why are we getting a census taken for the Israelites? Because in the Old Testament, censuses were taken for basically one of two reasons. One is government logistics kind of reasons, so taxes or land allotment. And the other reason, I guess also a government reason in a way, but the other reason is war. So it's either paying taxes or war. And so you have to figure out, okay, which of these two counts is this census data going to be in Revelation? Now, if you use the Bible to interpret the Bible, and you always start as close as possible, and so you stay in the book of Revelation, you go all the way up to Revelation chapter 14, you'll learn more about the 144,000, and that's the verses that tell us that this is not census data for the purpose of taxation. This is census data for the purpose of war. And the reason why we know that, here's Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. I'm going to skip to the end of verse 4. No one could learn a song that they're hearing. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. And so the 144,000 are blameless and pure. In fact, they're virgins, which makes me think that if you want to interpret the 144,000 literally, then you're going to have to go find 144,000 virgins, which, if they're adults, is in most time periods is going to be kind of hard to find, right? And so if you want to go literally, like if you want to go with one of the Christian cults or branches of not quite Christianity, but they still say they are, that say the 144,000, we're going to be one of them, and I hope you are too, but only 144,000 get to go to heaven, they better hope they're virgins, or else they don't fall into that list. And so it's, if you're going to read it literally, read it literally. Don't just pick and choose how figurative you want to go here, right? And so the 144,000 is a group of people set aside for war who are pure. The reason why we know this means that it's men who are set aside from war. It says women in particular that they haven't slept with. And then also we know that it's war because in the Old Testament, the Israelites had a census and got ready for battle. They would go through purification and make sure that they are pure for battle. And here, the 140,000 are so pure, they've never been impure, is the way it's thinking. And so, again, that's metaphor, saying that this is a group ready for battle. And so this group is ready for battle. They are ready to stand up and stand firm and be the Lord's army. And then you have to ask, okay, who exactly are they? We get that they're a group of Israelites ready for battle. There's 144,000 of them. What is going on here? And I think it's pretty clear it's not literal. I've kind of already let the cat out of the bag on my opinion on that one. And so what does it mean? Well, again, this is apocalyptic literature, and so numbers have special significance. 12, obviously, the number of God's people. We already talked about 12 tribes, and then if you want to go even further, there's the 12 apostles, and so we're thinking, okay, God's people, so 12 times 12, so all of God's people, times 1,000, which in apocalyptic literature of that time period, and throughout the Bible, 1,000 usually means a really big number. So we've got all of God's people and a whole lot of them. That's what the 144,000 means here in this, at least as far as numbers go. Now you have to ask, okay, what is going on with the tribes of Israel? Because if you're an extremely astute leader, or not leader, extremely astute a reader, or someone has just told you this before, I had to read in a book. I'd like to say I've thought of it myself, but no, I found it in books. Lots of books and lots of authors and lots of people point out the fact that not all 12 tribes are listed in this list, and yet there are still 12 of them. So that is weird. This specific list of 12 actually has 12, and yet there's not all 12. There's a tribe missing here. And so what do we do with that? I think maybe it's saying don't pay too close attention to the fact of who's in what tribe, right? The issue is that there's 13 tribes of Israel, depending on how you count. just like there's also 13 apostles, depending on how you count. But there's 12, right? It's 12. There's 12 of them. There's definitely 12. And so what happens in the census data and the lists of 12 tribes in the Old Testament is there's Ephraim and Manasseh, or Ephraim and Manasseh, is that they're half tribes. But instead, in this list, in Revelation chapter 7's list, we've got Joseph and Manasseh. Joseph's two half tribes were Ephraim and Manasseh. And so why does Joseph get one and then Manasseh gets one? That's just kind of weird. And then Dan is the tribe that is left out, even though what's goofy is in Ezekiel, in the passage about the end of the end times, about glorification and judgment day, and it is the end of the world when you get to the list of 12 tribes in Ezekiel chapter 48. Dan is in that list. In fact, he's the first one in the list. Then also to make this weird is I said this is a war census list, and yet the tribe of Levi is included in it. That's how you got around it. Sometimes the tribe of Levi would be left out for census lists about war because the priests don't technically go to war. And so what do we do with that, right? Like, that's confusing. But then, remember, okay, let's just pretend I'm right. And this is a non-literal list of not really 144,000. When I say non-literal, I mean it's symbolic of something else. And so we don't have to think it's literally 144,000 people, which would then make us think, why do we have to think it's literally 12 tribes? And so maybe it's giving us a meaning here in the tribes that are picked. And what if Levi is included in a list of tribes that are obviously going to war to be a hint at telling us that we're all priests now? Every tribe is a tribe of priests, because that's the way it is in God's people in the New Testament, and this is a New Testament book. And so it only makes sense that Levi would be included is if it's a kingdom of 100% priests. And then also, as I've said already several times, many people will read this and be like, oh, 144th of a particular group will be saved. It's not a list of 144,000 people who will be saved. It's not a list of 144,000 Israelites who will be saved. Remember, this is a theme that happens several times throughout the book, is John's going to hear one thing and then turn and look and see something different. But they're the same thing. He will hear this detail and turn and look and see this detail. They're the same thing, but one is a metaphor for the other. That happens several times in the book of Revelation. For example, when John hears about the lion of the tribe of Judah and turns and looks and sees a slain lamb. They're metaphors for the same thing, Jesus, right? In this instance, John is going to hear a census count for a war of 144,000 people from the 12 tribes of Israel, and then he's going to turn and look and see something different. And now we're in the next verse, verse 9. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might, 7 things, be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these, clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. And in my brain I always picture a, Sir, I hope you know. Sir, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So John hears 144,000 Israelites. He turns and sees an uncountable multitude from every tribe, nation, and place. And that's the meaning of the metaphor. The 144,000 are the uncountable multitude from everywhere. Isn't it great that God's not a racist? I think so. But this is the group who remains faithful to God, who are marked by God because they are on his side. And so they're going to survive the tribulation that is the plagues and the winds and the destruction of life on a fallen earth. Destruction has to happen. in a chaotic world because it's not perfect. And so, like, just wind itself is caused by the unequal heating of the Earth's surface. And so, extrapolate that out with not just physical realities of unequal heating, but just physical realities of, evil and suffering and people making sinful choices. And it's going to be a fallen world. And the good news we learned last time, Jesus is in charge of it all still. And we're going to learn throughout the book of Revelation, throughout the whole book, that God's doing it for a purpose, and it's to get people to repent. But hey, if you are loyal to God, you are marked to be on his side, and it doesn't matter what nation or tribe or language you speak, you're going to be okay. If you are loyal to God, he will mark you, and he will make sure that you stay safe in the end. These are those who have stayed on God's side through the worst of trials of the world. Now, regardless of your view of the end times, or not, you think, okay, Adam, you know what? Yeah, you just think this way, but I think this way about the end times. Regardless of your view of the end times, the meaning is the same here. Those who have endured in their faith to the end are saved, and their reward is very great. That's a good meaning, regardless of what section you're looking at for how this is going to play out in the end of times. This is, in some ways, it's one way to think about the training montage that I brought up in the sermon for this section here. If you've already watched that, it's the training montage. Is there's gonna be death and suffering and pain, but you know what? All that death and suffering and pain is not what you think about when you get the victory in the end. In your head, you just see this cool training montage of like all the greatest moments of training, as opposed to muscle soreness and aching and broken open knuckles and having to be corrected when you did things wrong and the pain that has to go through the training. This is how Paul thought of it. I've got 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18 pulled up. Paul wrote, "So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Says this stuff is light and momentary affliction, and Paul went through a whole lot more than most anyone watching this video is ever going to go through. Hopefully. But at least as far as what we have gone through yet. And he says it's not worth comparing to what it's going to feel like in the end. So hold on, hold fast, make sure you're someone who is loyal to God, and receive the mark of God on your head. They are those who have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Scripture compares washing to baptism. Have you been baptized into God's name? Have you taken that step of declaring your loyalty and oath to God? It's important things to think about, no matter what your view of the end times coming into the book of Revelation. And then what happens in these verses after that is another song is sung in heaven. And that song obviously has very, very, very strong allusions to the new heavens, the new earth, which we'll talk about almost all the way at the end of these lessons for the book of Revelation. But here's the cool part that I want to point out for these verses before I finish up this video. The really cool part is this is the throne room of God. And God's allowing a song to be sung not about him, but about his people. How cool is it that there's a song being sung in God's throne room, or will be sung in God's throne room, that's potentially about you. Because you can be a part of that uncountable multitude who's been marked and sealed off for God's side. If you hold on to faith in Jesus, there could be a song about you in heaven, which is kind of cool. At least I hope you think so. And so, some discussion questions that I'd love you to think about and comment on in the video, or at least ponder in your head. If God recut your life as a training montage, are there parts of your life that were no pleasant moments when you went through them, but you think they brought you into something better, and maybe there'll be some cool scenes, at least around those moments, that had to do with who made you into a better person now, what made you into a better person now? Also, remember how important and necessary the worship of God was in chapters 4 and 5, and then realize, now that we're in chapter 7, there could be a song about you in heaven. How does it make you feel that God is willing to share his spotlight with his people? That's partly why he made us, that he could share some of his aspects with us. The glory is all going to be on him, but he's going to share some things with you in heaven. Then also, think about that song as a prophecy for your life. That's where he's going to wipe every tear from your eye. and you'll never hunger or thirst again. How does that, as a prophecy about you maybe, how does that make you feel? All right, thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next chapters.